EAGLES, Eagles.
California love, Eagles fans. Welcome to another Football 24/7. I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II. He's John McMullen, our Philadelphia Eagles insider. We're bringing you a late edition of the show. Normally, we give you guys these shows typically, I don't know, in the 5:30, 6 o'clock hour. But now we're playing with West Coast time. We're playing with Texas time. Me and John are global right now, so we need you guys to bear with us. But nonetheless, man, we're here and we're ready to talk about your Philadelphia Eagles, the Eagles versus the Rams, Week 5 football. This is going to be really exciting. Can't wait for the game. John, first and foremost, how are you feeling, my friend? How is that California weather treating you?
It's beautiful out here. It's Los Angeles. I think it was supposed to be really hot today. I think it was, but tomorrow's going to be more of a Los Angeles light day, 75-ish, 80-ish, something around there. So really nice weather, but obviously it doesn't matter in SoFi anyway. So that part's not going to be that much of an issue. But yeah, some interesting moves by the Eagles today while I was in the air when it comes to their elevations, when it comes to their injury status. They put Cam Jurgens on IR, so he's going to be out for a minimum of 4 games. So that's kind of a disappointment. Obviously, you thought as the week went on, and they didn't put him on IR, you thought maybe it was a shorter term injury than that. But now we have a clear defining line. And then we talked about this a lot all year. No player in the NFL has passed the concussion protocol in 1 week. And the assumption was that, all right, the NFL's gotten tougher with these protocols and it's going to be more difficult. Britton Covey passed it. He was removed from the game status report and has no designation for the game. That means he's a full go. So we'll see if he's able to play, but I don't see any reason why he wouldn't now. And that would be the first player who was in the concussion protocol to make it back inside of a week. And then Rashad Penny has been added with an illness and was listed as doubtful. But, Rashad hasn't been a big impact on things as well. And then maybe the biggest one of all is that along with Braden Mann, who they have to elevate, they elevated Bradley Roby. So it's going to be no time, right on the field. We got an inkling of that on Friday, but there is going to be a little bit of a pitch count. But man, they want, and maybe Cooper Kupp being back for the Rams scared them a little bit because they know they need a real slot corner in there rather than a big body like James Bradbury or even Sidney Brown, who's not going to play anyway. So it was going to be a difficult matchup, but Bradley Roby's going to at least get some work right away.
You know what's interesting about this, John, with Cam Jurgens being out a minimum of 4 weeks, this is pretty scary for the Philadelphia Eagles. You have a guy in Sua Opeta coming in, and the Philadelphia Eagles have prided themselves on their offensive line coaching and their depth. They've been one of the best teams in terms of just having talent on talent in that offensive line room, but they're going to be going up against some pretty stout talent in the trenches, most notably Aaron Donald, and Sua Opeta is going to have his hands full. Granted, he'll be next to Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson. Those guys are going to definitely help him out. But what do you think the Philadelphia Eagles game plan should be, knowing that you're missing your starting right guard, knowing you're going to be going up against a guy like Aaron Donald? How do you think they should approach this game plan, knowing what they know, especially with all the injuries you mentioned? They're even missing Fletcher Cox. So how do you think they should move forward with the game plan?
Well, the game plan starts with 99, but it always does. Whether you're at full strength, half strength, no strength. When the Eagles had Jason Kelce and Brandon Brooks, and both all pro players, it started with Aaron Donald. That's how good he is. And the Eagles know that. So, but the good news from that standpoint is the Rams aren't as good as they have been in the past around Aaron Donald. So you can do some different things. Obviously, you're going to slide Jason Kelsey basically to his side pretty much for the entire game. And you can get away with that a little bit more now than maybe you could have in the past because, there's some Jonah Williams and Kobe Turner. If you're an old school football fan, that the 1970s Miami Dolphins were called the no-name defense. They didn't have a lot of stars, but they're really good.
Right.
This is a no-name defense other than Aaron Donald. Not many people that are familiar. Ernest Jones, a little bit. Witherspoon, the cornerback, but that's mainly from San Francisco. Jalen Ramsey was sort of the co-star, and he's gone. So they don't have much. And that means you can spend a little bit more time on Aaron Donald and probably get away with it. And I think that's how the Eagles will approach it.
So where exactly are the weaknesses on this Rams defense, John? Obviously, Aaron Donald's there. That's not a weakness, but you mentioned some names, and they have some guys scattered throughout there, like you said. Not too many guys that are world beaters, but still, they have a pretty solid defensive coordinator in Raheem Morris. Where are the weaknesses on this Rams defense? And John, you're real big on styles making fights. How should the Eagles handle this matchup? Where are the weaknesses that they can exploit?
Yeah, I think the Rams are really weak in the secondary. You have Aaron Donald up front. You have Jones, who's a pretty good linebacker. Byron Young is another guy, an edge guy who's gotten a decent amount of pressures this season. I think he has 3 sacks as well, so he's done some nice things. But I mentioned Jalen Ramsey. I know how much respect that Nick Sirianni talks about Jalen Ramsey all the time. That type of player not being there, and obviously he got hurt, but you never know how those things shake out. But he was an all-pro level player, and they just haven't been able to replace him or anything close. You talk about no names. Darion Kendrick, is that familiar to you? Russ Yeast, Witherspoon, I mentioned, some people might know. Jordan Fuller is the other safety. He's had a really poor season early on. They're really weak in the secondary. So just like last week when you looked at Washington and said, all right, the strength is the front, but they got to go after that secondary. Well, this secondary is even worse than that secondary, and pretty significantly. So I think this is back-to-back A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith game right here.
But let me ask you this, right? Because the way I see it, I understand they're weak in the secondary. There's no doubt about that. And you have guys like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. You have those weapons at your disposal. You have Jalen Hurts, second team All-Pro quarterback. You have that talent at your disposal. But for me at least, I think this has to be a game where the Philadelphia Eagles really, for lack of better terms, punch the Rams in the mouth, right? And this is what I mean by this. The Rams are a team that's currently 0-2 at home. On top of that, they're giving up north of 150 yards rushing on the ground at home, compared to giving up just 90 yards on the road. So they're 0-2 at home. They're 2-0 on the road. They're giving up over 150 yards rushing at home. They're giving up just 90 yards rushing on the ground on the road. That's a pretty large disparity in terms of their performance in defending the run. Don't you think that's something the Philadelphia Eagles should try to exploit and try to wear down that pass rush that comes from a guy like Aaron Donald and then eventually get to the passing game?
Well, we talk about sample sizes. Nick says it all the time now. The sample sizes are still pretty small. I will say that
but don't you think that's drastic? 150, 90, that's a pretty big disparity, right?
Well, I'm just trying to look up who the Rams played at home versus who they played on the road. But while I do that, the Rams aren't, I compared them to Washington, but it's not like they're strong up front
Mhm.
either. Washington is strong up front, so it's not a perfect comparison. They're weak everywhere except for Aaron Donald. They don't have a lot of talent. I would say this is a bottom 5 roster defensively in the NFL, and that's with Aaron Donald. They don't have home games, number one. Everybody takes over that place. Uh, they
Point.
played they played San Francisco at home. Well, the 49ers took over that play. They take over. They always take over when they play in Los Angeles. Obviously, the Raiders, they don't play that much, but they always do. There will be more Eagles fans in that building tomorrow than Rams fans. So they don't have home field advantage. That's number one. Number two, they've only had one home game,
Yeah, scratch that.
and
Yeah, yeah,
that's at
yeah. I just
San
realized that was
Francisco.
a misquote by me. I apologize. That was on me.
Yeah. So this will be their second home. They got 3 in a row. They have the
Right.
3 Eagles, Cardinals, Steelers, and I guarantee you, maybe they'll get a respite with the Cardinals, but Eagles fans and Steelers fans will take over that stadium. Um, but yeah, they're just not. They don't have a lot of talent on defense. They just don't. They have, one of the 5 greatest defensive players who ever lived, and then a bunch of other guys. And you know, you should be able to deal with Aaron Donald because the supporting cast isn't there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, uh, I'm thinking about the quarterback situation in Los Angeles with Matthew Stafford. This is going to be the best quarterback they've faced since Patrick Mahomes. And this Philadelphia Eagles passing defense really hasn't been stout over the past few weeks. How do you think Sean Desai remedies that issue going up against a guy who's ranked, I believe, second or third in the league in passing yards? Granted, they're not really getting the ball in the end zone through the air right now, but they're able to move that ball in the air essentially at will, being ranked second or third in passing yards. How do you think Sean Desai is going to find a way to handle Matthew Stafford and Sean McVey? Sean McVey is one of the wonder boys of the NFL, and he knows how to get those guys open. You got these new young cats in Tutu Atwell and Puka Nakal, and then you got Cooper Kupp coming back. How will this Philadelphia Eagles passing defense fare against Matthew Stafford and these up and coming weapons, along with the proven weapon in Cooper Kupp, with the mind of Sean McVay?
Well, that's one of the most interesting things to me in the season coming up. Not only the Rams, but also Miami in a couple of weeks, because those are 2 teams that use a whole lot of motion on offense, and that tends to stress the communication on defense. And we talked about the communication aspect of it, the young defensive backs, and how they sometimes struggle with that. So they're going to get really, really tested with these 2 particular teams, because they're going to run a boatload of motion. And it starts with Sean McVay, and they'll use all that cheat motion where they try to whip the one receiver around the other and immediately snap the football. It's going to take a lot of communication. And believe it or not, I think Bradley Roby, who's never played a snap with the Eagles, is probably more equipped for it than some of the other, just because he's played so much football and he understands what's going on in those types of situations. But I think the sped up nature of Roby tells you what they feel about the secondary right now. And they want a real slot cornerback so Bradbury can go back to the outside. You don't have to worry about Josh Jobe. Justin Evans is going to be back, and the Eagles are very happy with him. So that'll be an improvement next to Reed Blankenship. But if you compare it to last year, they're just not as good in the secondary as they were last year. Part of that's injury related. And certainly Avante missed, I think, 9 games last year. So it's not like they didn't have to make do, but
Right.
He played at least a significant portion. He made it back for the run to the Super Bowl. You had C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a terrific talent. You had Marcus Epps, a very steady player. And maybe they'll get better, but right now they're not as good as the group from last year.
Historically, what have teams done to try to negate what Sean McVey does very well? You mentioned he does a lot of motion. He's going to give you a lot of trickery. He's going to make your eyes see one thing and do another. Historically, what have teams done, or what can be done necessarily to negate what Sean McVey does so very well?
Yeah, I mean, he calls it the illusion of complexity. So it looks complex, but it really isn't. That's what Sean calls it to his own players. And basically, and Jim Schwartz used to preach this all the time. It's, just don't get rattled by it. They're trying to stress. They're trying to force you to make a mistake by putting your eyes where they're not supposed to be. So, if you're playing cover 8, if you're playing quarters, play cover 8, play quarters, play cover 2. Play what you're supposed to play, and don't let the extra movement, the eyewash, as Jim would call it, affect what you're supposed to do on a particular play. Because especially in zone coverage, they can run around all they want. It's not going to affect your coverage if you do it correctly. But that's easier said than done, especially with younger, more inexperienced players. Because if you see this wacky stuff going on, you want to react to it. It's just human nature. And you have to be more disciplined. So it's just an effort to stress the discipline. And, a lot of people have trouble with it.
Fletcher Cox being out, that's a strong hit, but at the same time, they have a lot of depth at that position. They're also going to be missing Martin Tuipulotu, another blow to the defensive line depth. But you have Jalen Carter, you have Jordan Davis, Kentavious Street, I believe Moro Jomo. Is he activated? I'm not entirely sure, but you're going to have some guys there who have been playing very well so far throughout the season, and we're going to see a very high dose of Jalen Carter. The most we'll probably see, the most we're going to see until Fletcher Cox comes back. But with this opportunity that Jalen Carter has, can this Rams offensive line be had? Matthew Stafford is a guy who's suffering from a hip injury right now. He's been kind of stiff lately. He's also been turning the ball over a lot. And with quarterbacks, they're built from the feet up. So could Jalen Carter and those boys take advantage of Matthew Stafford, sort of being limited with that hip and maybe force some more turnovers?
Look, Matthews, and we talked to Slay this week, who has tremendous respect for Matthew Stafford, and he's really good. And, people didn't figure it out because he was on a real bad team. That's not true. In the NFL, he had tremendous respect.
Yeah, I think people knew how good he was, but again, being in Detroit for so long, it's easy to forget that.
Yeah. So he's not a guy who's going to fall apart and turn the football over 4 or 5 times. This is just not what he does. Now he does, he likes to press the issue at times. He will try to make throws that others can't. He's got tremendous arm talent, and the hip injury, we don't know. He certainly struggled through the game last week after it happened. So how healthy is he going to be? That could certainly help the Eagles. But yeah, I think the Rams are going to score some points, and they're going to score some points because the quarterback can throw the football. Cooper Kupp looks healthy. We don't know. He hasn't played this season, but that's one of the best receivers in football. And all of a sudden you mentioned what Puka Nacua has been able to do in his absence, and Tutu Atwell, and he's got people to throw to. And when Matthew Stafford has people to throw to, there's going to be some issues. And even good defenses are going to struggle to keep it down. But as I always say, Kirk Cousins, you almost want him throwing for 350. And by that, I mean, if he's thrown for 350, it means he's behind and he's trying to catch up.
Okay, John, as we begin to close the show, staying on the quarterback position, Jalen Hurts, he seemed to turn a page in the second half of that Washington Commanders game. And at least me, I'm expecting another step forward in this matchup. Like you said, this Rams defensive back crew, they're not the most stout. So what are your expectations from Jalen Hurts, by his lonesome? And what's your prediction for this matchup?
I do think it's going to be a shootout. I think the Eagles are going to have to score some points. I think they're going to have to be in the 30s. I think I put it at 33-27.
Okay.
Eagles win the game.
Mine was 36-33.
Basically how they won, they out-talent people. And I think ultimately they'll out-talent the Rams. But a little bit of concern because it's on the road. It is, the Eagles just left like an hour ago. I mean, they're coming in and leaving. They are making this a business trip only. It's a tough flight. It's a long flight. The Eagles use 2 team planes now to give the guys more space, which is a bigger deal when you're traveling across country. So that part's an issue. Then the injuries, the major injuries, Cam Jurgens, right? And you don't want anybody getting hurt, but he's getting hurt when you got to face Aaron Donald. So that's not a positive. Fletcher Cox, you don't want him getting an epidural, but he's getting it the week where they have, Matthew Stafford's getting Cooper Kupp back. So you need that pass rush. And Bradley Roby coming in off the street. Long term, I think that's going to be a positive for the Eagles. But day one, he gets Cooper Kupp, who hasn't played at all, but that's the best slot receiver in football, arguably the best receiver overall in football. And he's uncoverable. And from the short video clips I saw him in practice this week, he looks great. So some of the matchups are a little bit of a problem, but then I look at the talent they have on defense. It's a very top heavy team. You got Stafford, you got Kupp, you got Donald. Even Jody will tell you Puka Nacua is going to be. He's already got him in the Hall of Fame next to Brock Purdy. So, they're very top heavy, but they don't have a lot of depth.
So your expectations for Jalen Hurts, what do you think he's going to do in this game?
I think it's a big passing game again. You'd like to see him, get some of the quarterback run game things going, but I do think he's trying to be a little bit cautious, for a lack of a better word. He wants to play 17 games. He really wants to prove he can play 17 games. And, maybe when Kansas City's on the schedule, or Buffalo or Miami in a couple weeks, there'll be hell's bells and he'll do everything to win football games. But I think he's being smart. And even though he won't admit it, who looks at certain teams and says, we're gonna be able to out-talent this team.
Okay. On that note, you guys, listen, we appreciate you guys for locking in on short notice. John, as always, I appreciate you, my man. I know you had a long flight, about 6 hours from the Philadelphia area. I know that's no small feat. Trust me, I had to drive 24 hours from Philadelphia to Texas, so I know exactly what it's like to be stuck somewhere for a long period of time and not have that leg space. But I appreciate you as always, man, for making time for me and making time for the show. Eagles fans, make sure you guys smash that like button, okay? Make sure you guys always stay engaged in the content. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. You know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? The pre-halftime and post-game show featuring Seth Joyner, Mike Missinelli, Derek Gunn, John McMullen. Kayla Santiago, Bill Colarulo, Mark Farzetta. We have a full cast of people for you guys to definitely give you guys the full scoop on your Philadelphia Eagles to prepare you for the game, to give you guys some insight in between the game, and also relive what's going on in that matchup. So we really appreciate you guys for always locking in and staying committed to JAKIB Sports. John, any final words before we get out of here?
33-27. I'll emphasize it again. And I think it's going to be a shootout, but I think the Eagles will be plus 30, and that'll be enough to get it done.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I'm going to say 36-33, Philadelphia Eagles win it on a game-winning field goal, and I'll leave it at that, you guys. Eagles fans, smash that like button. You guys were locked in on Football 24/7 with John McMullen. I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II, and we'll see you next time. Fly, Eagles, fly.